Hello, everyone. I would like to introduce Alyssa Miller with her talk on a Pitmaster's Guide to Security Design.
All right. Well, thank you so much and welcome to CircleCityCon. Hey, everybody. Boy, when I was asked to give a keynote today, who could have imagined we'd be doing it from my office here and y'all would be out there in cyberspace. Miss being able to see all your lovely faces. I miss my InfoSec fam, but hey, we're still here. We're doing it. This is all about the apocalypse, and I guess what could be more fitting than doing a keynote from my little bunker here in Wisconsin. So great to have you all aboard. So this is where I usually like to ask the question, but you guys aren't going to be able to respond. But I wanted to ask it to you anyway. Think about this for a minute. What is your favorite food? Sounds like a pretty common, simple question, but what is that one food that when you see it, the drool just starts running from your mouth? For me, it's brisket. I am all about the brisket. I am all about barbecue in general, but I haven't always been. I remember way back when I first discovered barbecue. I come from Wisconsin. I've lived here all my life. Barbecue up here is not real barbecue. So it wasn't until my adult life that I actually discovered I loved barbecue. And so after finding out that, gee, you know what, this brisket thing is amazing, I need more of this, I ran out, I got myself a smoker, not the one you see here, but, I bought myself my first smoker, read up, got all this stuff, got all really excited, bought a brisket, and I was going to make a brisket. And so, I spent hours and hours with that brisket on the smoker, tending the fire, adding wood chips, doing all the things you do. And when it came off, I was all excited. I cut into it, sliced it up, and that first bite was probably the most disappointing thing I could have imagined. It was not the brisket that I was hoping for. Now, years and years and years, more than a decade later, I've gotten pretty damn good at it. And the smoker you see there in the image is the one that's out back on my patio right now. It's where all the magic happens. But later on, I was talking to an executive leader in an organization as part of a consulting gig. And, he was talking about how they'd gone through all this effort. They'd just completed a few major initiatives and they got breached. And it reminded me, and I brought it up to him at the time as a metaphor of like, it was just like that barbecue. I spent all those hours and hours and hours on barbecue, smoking that meat. And in the end, I still didn't get the result I wanted. It's the same thing in security. It's what we struggle with. And so I got to thinking, boy, there's a lot of lessons to be learned from what we do in making a great brisket that also teach us a lot about security. But let's take a look first. I just want to talk a little bit about the current state of affairs in security. There's no doubt, I think we're all familiar with the breach trends from last year in particular that have continued on into early 2020. They don't get a lot of press right now. Everybody's worried about COVID. We're worried about, the equality issues going on and protests and things, everything that's happening in our world. There's so much going on that we've kind of forgotten about these breaches, but they're still happening. And we're still seeing some of the same themes. S3 buckets or cloud buckets in general now that are exposed publicly and being breached, containing large amounts of private data. Container images that are vulnerable. As the headline says, hackers love Docker because you've now got developers who are launching container images that contain vulnerabilities, and the folks on the security and the ops side, they're not able to really keep up with what's getting launched there and make sure that they're able to keep those environments secure. And of course, the ongoing internet of trash. Everything that we can connect to the internet, we're connecting to the internet. I posted a blog post towards the end of last year about a curling iron that was now internet enabled, and I just can't fathom why. There was also something about a candle that you could automatically light with your phone. And I struggle to understand why that's a thing we need either. But This is the reality of the world we live in. So if we dig a little deeper into this, last year in working for a former employer, I did some research. I was part of their penetration testing arm. And so we looked at the vulnerabilities we were finding through our pen tests. And what we discovered, no surprise in the context of these S3 buckets that keep getting breached, is that 40% of the vulnerabilities we were finding were related to configuration issues just like that. Things where there was an easy fix, but they were things that were just getting mixed. So we look back. I said, well, okay, if this is where we're at in Q4 of 2019, what was it like 3 years ago, and how has this changed? Well, what's scary is it didn't change. Over the course of those last 3 years, it was the same story. It was almost a flat line. In fact, you can see I drew in a trend line there. The trend line is flat, 40%. 40% of those vulnerabilities consistently are configuration management issues. That's not changing. It's no wonder that moving to cloud environments, we have the same issues that we've seen in on-prem environments. But what about those Docker images? We have Docker Hub with their official images. I should be able to pull an image. It should be secure, right? I read that on a blog from a developer not too long ago. Yeah, go grab the official image. It should be secure. Well, oh my God, if you're using Node and you grab that Node image from Docker, be ready. 642 vulnerabilities that exist in that single image. If you grab Node latest from Docker, that's what you're getting. And you can see the others here, Postgres, Nginx, MySQL, all of them. Significant numbers of vulnerabilities that exist in these official images. Ubuntu is the only one that looks kind of positive. Like last year, 2018, they had 30 vulnerabilities. This year, at least when I pulled it earlier in March, it was 0. So maybe there's something promising there. But again, no wonder we're getting breached through vulnerable Docker images. And what about IoT? We all know IoT loves to make use of open source. We all do. We all make use of open source. If you're doing any modern development, you're pulling in dependencies, you're using open source. But what do we see happening in the open source space? Most vulnerabilities reported in open source last year were cross-site scripting vulnerabilities, more than anything else. And indeed, if I look back at the trends, cross-site scripting's been up there for years. Cross-site scripting has been on the OWASP top 10 since 2003, and we still see more of those vulnerabilities than anything else. So obviously, we have some work to do. And so, you know what? This is where it's time. It's time to get that brisket on the smoker, and we're going to build some better security. So I'm going to teach you today 2 things. I'm going to teach you how to make a really killer brisket using 5 rules that every pitmaster has heard, and hopefully most of them follow. But at the same time, we're going to connect each of those rules to how we build our security programs in our enterprises. Because for all of you here, we're going to talk these next 3 days about all sorts of really cool stuff. I looked through the laundry list of great talks that are out there through CircleCityCon all 3 days. This is amazing. We got some great stuff. There's some really good high-level talks. There's some really good strategy talks. There's really awesome exploit talks out there. We've got the myriad. It all comes down to, though, this simple fact. How do I build a security program, whether it's in my organization, whether it's for packages I maintain, whatever it is? How do I build that program to make sure that we get a little better in this world? So that's what we're going to talk about today. And we're connecting it all to the best thing in the world, brisket. So the first rule that every pitmaster needs to subscribe to, any good award-winning pitmaster knows this, planning and preparation wins the day. Now, what do I mean? You can't just go out and buy a brisket and throw it on a smoker and expect that it's going to be wonderful. It doesn't work that way. First of all, you got to plan. You got to plan because it takes hours, 8, 10, 12, 14 hours to smoke a brisket. You're talking about something, a piece of meat that weighs anywhere from 11 to 18 pounds. Yeah, I've smoked 18-pound briskets. It's going to take a while. So you have to commit yourself to a long day of smoking that brisket. You also need to prep it, because if you go to a butcher unless you're buying it and specifically asking for it to be prepped, it needs to be trimmed. Brisket, the greatest thing about brisket is the amount of fat in it, but that's also the thing that can screw it up if you don't trim it down right. There's so much fat there, you got to get rid of it because it's going to slow down the cook, and ultimately too much fat is not a good thing. So you want some of it, but you can see here I'm trimming off large chunks of fat because that's typically what comes on a brisket, and you need to thin that down. But what does that mean in terms of security? Well, when we're talking about a security program, we need to plan. We need that level of commitment. We need buy-in at executive and board levels. There is no way that I can launch a security program if I don't have the sponsorship of my executives. It's just that simple. It's doomed to fail from the start, because everything that I do from a security perspective has to align to what is meaningful for the business. Otherwise, as you all are probably well aware, if you've worked in any organization as a security person, you know, when push comes to shove, the business wins. And if you're arguing against the business and they're arguing for something else, they're the ones that are going to get their way. 99 out of 100 times, that's just the way it works. But that's as it should be. And I know that's kind of an odd opinion for a security person, but that's exactly as it should be. That's how businesses run. It's our job as security professionals to make sure that the messages that we're bringing to those executives show them how our security initiatives tie into and help enable that business. Now, traditionally in security, our approach has always been FUD. For years and years, as far back as I can remember, and I've been in security for 15 years. I've been working in IT a hell of a lot longer than that. I'm not even going to tell you how long. You know, security people have always been about tell the scary stories. Let's scare them into doing stuff. Let's make them nervous. Let's show them how bad things are going to be if they don't take on this security initiative, if they don't let me implement this new tool or this new control, or they don't fix these vulnerabilities. I'm going to scare them so much that they're going to want to fix those things. Well, guess what? That doesn't work. In fact, as neuroscience tells us, that approach is actually counterproductive. So this is something really fascinating, because when you're going to go before your board or you're going to go to your executives, you need to understand how to communicate with them appropriately. And FUD is not the effective way to get them to buy into what it is that you're telling them they need to do. You're trying to spur them to action. And fear, uncertainty, and doubt are not the way to get that action. The fact of the matter is, neuroscience tells us that if I'm looking to discourage an action, I want somebody to not do something. I don't want that child to put their hand on a hot stove. The best way for me to encourage them to discourage them from taking that action is to scare them. That's where the fear comes in. If I want to use fear, uncertainty, and doubt, what I'm doing is I'm motivating somebody to not do anything at all. And in fact, if you think about it, it makes a lot of sense. What do you do when you perceive a threat? Generally, our response is to avoid that threat. We move away from it. We don't attack it. So we don't want to go into executives and say, here's how everything's so horribly scary and terrible. No, instead, the way to encourage action, to create that call to go do something, to give me some money so I can spend it on these tools that are going to make us more secure, is to show a reward. What is it about my proposal here that's going to make things better, make you, the executive, look like a hero? What's going to drive our stock price up? What's going to open up new business for us? What's going to save us a bunch of money? Those are the things that we need to be focusing on, not how scary the world is and how we need to shut ourselves off from it. So to do that, we can kind of take a good, better, best approach. The good approach is to show those cost savings. That's a benefit. That's something tangible. That's something that's going to make certain leadership look good. If I can save money because, hey, I implemented this particular security tool, that's a good thing. They like that. That makes them look good. That's motivating to them. But we can do better. we can get them more excited than just, oh, hey, you're going to help me save money. We can actually show them how our security expenditure will help them tackle a wish list item. If I'm saving them money, and probably then in the form of not just cash, but resources, I'm probably freeing up resources that could be used in other ways. Every IT department I've ever seen has that wish list item that ties back to some business initiative that's on hold because IT can't do this thing that they want to do. Show them how you're going to make that happen. And if you expand on that, you really want to get them, you really want to wake them up, you really want them to pay attention, show them how your security initiative is actually going to enable a new line of business or a new channel of revenue. Yes, this happens. This can be done. I've done it. It's important because this is the language they speak. This is what they are looking at those higher levels of leadership. How are we going to continue to drive our business forward and continue to find new channels, new innovations that are going to create new revenue for us? That's the business world. And we as security people, we need to be able to speak to that. So when you're going to go talk to an executive or to a high-level leader, there's a few things you need to understand. And I realize that not everybody in security gets this type of training. This is crucial, though. It's really disappointing that there's so many people in the security world who don't understand it, because our job is to convince these people that this is what we need from them. We need to get our leadership to understand why these things are important. So first and foremost, you go in, if you're going to speak, especially at a board level or at an executive meeting, understand your time is very limited. The higher up the chain you go, the shorter the amount of time you're going to have to talk. So you got to be able to say everything you want to say in 3 minutes. This is not the case where you go in there with a, big intro, tell them what you're going to say, then tell them what you said. No, you jump right to the point. Boom, here it is. What is the most salient point that you have? That's the first thing you tell them, and then let it flow from there. The second thing, be prepared for interruptions and don't take it personally. Understand that you are going to be asked tough questions, and they're not going to wait until the end of your presentation to ask you. They're going to be right there. They're going to want to know fast. They have a lot of things on their mind. They're working through 100 different things as you're sitting there talking to them. They're going to ask the questions as they come to mind. That's typically in those spaces how these leaders function. And so be prepared for that. And as such, be prepared for the questions. Know what the questions are that they're going to ask before you get in there. Think about it from their perspective. If you didn't know anything, what would you be asking? And go in there prepared to answer those questions. That's how you win support. You go in and they ask you a bunch of questions and you say, I don't know. One or two, maybe if you say, hey, I got to do a little more research, you can get away with that. If every question they ask you're unprepared to answer, you're not going to get that support. If you can go in there and you can be prepared and you have the data to back up your answers, that's gold when it comes to winning support from executives. So let's go back to barbecue. This is the one rule that I think everybody who's ever attempted barbecue has heard said somewhere along the way. Pitmasters rule number 2, low and slow. You can't rush it. When I talk about low and slow, I'm talking about that number you see in the upper left there, that 225 degrees. That is exceptionally cool if we're thinking about how we normally bake food. But we're not baking, we are smoking. We're cooking that stuff. And to cook it, we want to keep it low and we want it to cook slow. This is why it takes 14 hours to smoke a brisket, because we're doing it at a low temperature. That's what makes it juicy. That's what makes it tender. We can't rush that. If you jack up the temperatures and you try to make it happen fast, you'll just ruin that meat. This is why you have to be patient. You can't rush this stuff. You can't just throw it on there, have it done in a couple hours, and go to eating. It doesn't work that way. Nothing happens that fast. When it comes to security, it's kind of the same thing. We can't expect that our security initiatives are going to secure everything tomorrow. And we need to make sure that the folks that we're working with, our leadership that we're trying to gain sponsorship from, they need to understand that as well. And it's up to us to share that message. So don't try to boil the ocean. Instead, think about Is anybody sick of the castle metaphors? Well, that's because when we do these, we always talk about it like we need these big, strong walls on the outside. But the reality is, if you look at a castle like this is Dover Castle. The way they built it was with this big, strong, fortified keep in the middle first. And then they built all their defenses around it. And that keep is what houses everything that was most critical, all their most crucial assets. We need to do the same thing with IT security. So it starts with how do we think about those assets? If I'm talking in the context of an organization, my assets aren't IT systems. They could live anywhere. Assets could be anything. Yes, digital transformation is creating the need for these systems, but what is the actual asset? What actually means something to my business? How do I make money as a business? It's things like private data. How do I protect the privacy of my customers, of my people? This is what's important. This is what we need to be aware of when we think about the business. Or how about those critical functions? If I work in a utility industry, my ability to deliver electricity is an asset because that is the thing that's making me money. If I'm not delivering electricity, I'm not making money. That's how it works. These are the assets I care about when it comes to that type of business. What about your financial assets? That one's kind of more obvious, right? How do I prevent, threats against just our financials? You ever think about people as an asset? We kind of do in the terms of like HR, but think about from a business sense. Think about from a security sense. It's up to us to protect the people because those people can be crucial. Think about healthcare. If our doctors can't do their jobs, if our nurses can't do their jobs, if our other care workers can't do their jobs, what good are those hospitals and clinics? We need to be able to defend them. And then finally, of course, there's all the secrets, trade secrets, you name it. There's always that proprietary confidential data that we need to keep safe. Many of those, especially the trade secrets, have a direct impact on the bottom line of the organization. So those are the things that we need to think about that we're trying to protect. We need to think when we start looking at threats, we need to look at threats in terms of these assets, the assets that mean something to the company. Now, how do we go about this crazy idea I have of what I call inside out security, where I'm starting with that keep? Well, it's pretty simple. Find those assets, build your defenses around them, but start at the asset first. We're all probably very familiar with this concept of the hard outer shell and the ooey gooey middle. Well, that's because we always build our defenses that way. We start at the perimeter. You think about when we started putting computers on the internet, the first thing we did was we built firewalls to protect the networks that we were connecting to the internet. We didn't defend inside that. We need to think about it differently. We need to start building from the inside out and do it in stages. We can't boil the ocean and expect to build this all at once. We've got to get incrementally better over time. That's how security programs live. So what does that process look like? Well, I already said you identify your assets. From those assets, you can determine what the threats are. And now you can translate those assets into IT assets. And now those threats you can translate into technical threats that affect those IT systems. From there, you can start to establish those micro perimeters. So what does that perimeter look like? Maybe that perimeter is the edge of your database. Maybe that perimeter is the edge of a particular microservice. Maybe that perimeter is one segment of a largely segmented network. Whatever it is, establish those micro perimeters and defend them. Build your defenses that way and then assess them. Assess those defenses, and then it's just simply wash, rinse, repeat. Constantly building, assessing, and improving your defenses. It's continuous improvement. That's what security needs to be doing to be effective in the world of ever-changing technology that we're sitting in today. Go low, go slow. It will be worth it in the end. So moving on. Next rule for Pitmasters. Rule number 3. Good smoke is essential dirty smoke will ruin you, and it'll ruin your meat. What am I talking about with good smoke? So take a look at this image. Look at that smokestack for a second. Look at the smoke coming out of that smokestack. You can barely see it. It's very thin, it's very wispy, it's very almost bluish in color. As a pitmaster, that's the kind of smoke that I want. That smoke tells me that my fuel is burning efficiently. And for me, my fuel is typically logs. If I've got big, billowy white smoke pouring out of there, that's a sign that I've got inefficient burning. And the problem with inefficient burning is that it creates creosote. And creosote lines your meat with a very ultra bitter taste. And once it's on the meat, it's over. You won't get rid of that taste. And it can ruin a wonderful piece of meat, a wonderful cut of brisket or ribs or whatever it is that you've got on your smoker. So one of the keys when you're smoking any form of barbecue is making sure you've got that good, clean smoke. Well, what is clean smoke when I'm talking security? It's accurate and effective metrics. We don't like to think about this a lot in security. We're focused on technical issues. We're focused on exploits. We're focused on APTs and what they're doing out there. And we want to know what TTPs they're following. And we got all these cool acronyms and things. At the end of the day, we don't like thinking about metrics in security. Because that's like that other soft stuff that other people do. And we don't worry about it. But if I'm building a security program, it's totally not helpful if I can't measure what the success is of that security program. How do I know if it's good or bad? How do I tell those executives who just gave me millions of dollars to go spend on a security initiative that their money was well spent if I don't have good metrics that are effective and accurate? So understanding the tooling I have, understanding how I can collect that data. What data do I even want to collect? These are all the things that we need to be aware of. These are things that we have to plan for from the beginning, because this is how we're going to establish the continued success of that program. So let's talk for a minute about goals. Anytime I'm going to launch an initiative, my leadership is going to ask me for goals. What am I trying to accomplish? How am I going to know that I've been successful? What is that thing? What do I need to get to that's going to tell me that, hey, you made it. You did good. What am I measuring myself against? And what I'm going to tell you is goals are important. You need to have these laid out, because that gives you that mission that you're going to drive toward. This is our vision for security looks like this. This is where we want to get to. We're going to drive to get there. But what I also tell you is that those goals should be based on improvement, not attainment. And what do I mean? So improvement is greater than attainment. When I say improvement, I want my metrics to look at how am I getting better, not setting a target of, hey, I got to hit X number of these, or, this is my 100% mark. I got to get there. How did I improve quarter over quarter or year over year in some meaningful metric? This is how you measure the success of a program. And this is what you need to prepare your leadership to understand. They'll accept this. They understand it. If we're not selling them a solution as this is the end all be all answer that's going to fix all of our woes and vulnerability management, then they don't expect all the woes of vulnerability management to be fixed after you've bought that product. If you say, this is going to allow us to incrementally get better and better and better over time, here's how I see that laid out, that's an effective metric that's realistic that you can actually hit. They'll buy into that the same way. In fact, a lot of the smarter leaders out there, they understand this, and that's actually what they want. They don't want you to give them promises of absolute wins and 100% vulnerability remediations and all these crazy things that people talk about. We know as security people it's not going to happen. So why do we let executives or leadership believe that that's what's going to happen? Why do we sometimes mislead them and even tell them that's what's going to happen? Lay out a plan. Lay out a plan of continuous improvement. Work with them to understand that this is what we're doing. As we get incrementally better and better and better, we're reducing the risk to the organization. And when I'm talking to shareholders, or I'm talking to a CEO, or I'm talking to a CRO, that's what matters most to them. What is security doing to reduce the risks to our organization? That's meaningful metrics. Now, metrics are great across the organization. I'm sure many of you listening right now, you're embroiled in this. You're creating reports and they're going every which way, and you have to generate them. And maybe that's part of why we don't like metrics in security, because it's so onerous. But we can probably alleviate a lot of that by just being aware of our audience. Who sees that report? Where does that report go? Are the metrics that are in that report meaningful to that audience? Am I trying to cover all audiences with the same report? That's not a really great idea. Those executives on the right, they've got a far different interest than those engineers on the left. The engineers, they need timely data. They need very granular data. They need to be able to understand. If you're telling me I have 7 high severity vulnerabilities in my queue right now that need to be remediated, well, I need to understand the details of those. On the right side, they don't care so much about those individual vulnerabilities. They care about the trends. They care about the risk picture. What does it look like? And they want to see those numbers on a periodic basis that fits their working model, which is generally something like a quarterly or a monthly report. Whereas those engineers, most of them want to see that stuff real time. So how can I put stuff in tracking databases or ticketing tools, things like Jira, where they're already living anyway, so they can view that information. And then they can pull that out on demand. They know right where they stand at a moment's notice. That's effective work. Pitmaster rule number 4. There is no set it and forget it. If you're going to be smoking meat, this isn't like throwing a frozen pizza in the oven for 15 minutes on 400 degrees and then it's done and you take it out and you eat. It doesn't work that way. Now, I know if Dave Kennedy's out there somewhere listening to this right now, he's screaming, but my Traeger, but my Camp Chef, these pellet smokers, you just put all the pellets in and they go and it does it. Yes, there are some smokers that are easier than others, but it's still work and it's not something you just walk away from. For me, I don't use a pellet smoker. I use, as I mentioned before, a wood burner. And so for me, it's constant process of fire management to make sure that I keep that fire burning efficiently, but at the right temperature so it doesn't get too hot and ruin the meat. So if I'm keeping things 225 to 250 where I like to have them for my brisket, it's due in part because I'm constantly managing that fire. I might be able to walk away for maybe a half hour to an hour at a time, but it's something that I have to constantly be aware of through the process. That's part of the process. For me, it's kind of a cathartic thing. I actually enjoy, that's part of what I enjoy about the process. But even with a pellet smoker, you're still, there's tasks you need to do. You need to refill the pellets from time to time. You need to monitor your temperatures. You don't just walk away from it. You're always watching that meat to make sure that everything stays the way you want it over that duration of the hours and hours and hours that it's going to be sitting on that smoker. So when I think about this in terms of an organization, I'm thinking about how do I have those constant touch points across my organization. We look at the modern DevSecOps motion today. We've actually got 3 motions. We've got security trying to push left. We've been doing that for decades. We've got developers now who are pushing farther and farther right. They're writing code that creates the infrastructure that their applications are going to run on. And because infrastructure is being created as code, we've got the ops teams moving up the stack. They now have to be aware of how to look at that code and understand it. And that's a very different scenario than we're ever used to before. What we're used to in security is we're used to being those gates. We're used to being that checkpoint that happens between the phases of the software delivery lifecycle. And that's it. That's what we do. Oh, you're done, you're done with your code and you're going to commit it. Okay, we're going to run a SaaS tool. We're going to run software composition analysis, and we're going to see what vulnerabilities you have. And then when we find them, we're going to send it back to you, and you got to go back to the development process again. Those cyclical motions don't work when we're talking DevOps. When we're talking continuous integration, continuous deployment, it's even worse. So how do we do this differently? Well, we need to stop being the gates between the phases and start becoming part of the phases. Now, I know there's plenty of talks out there on DevSecOps and how do we put security into the DevOps space. But this is what it breaks down to. Those immediate feedback cycles, real-time information that developers can work with throughout the process. And it's not just the development teams, it's our business folks as well. Bring them in. Do you see that threat modeling on the far left? Talk about pushing left. Have you ever thought about doing threat modeling in your backlog? Can you have somebody, when they write a user story, actually write up a threat model of that user story? Now you've really pushed far left, and you've got valuable information that developers can use to design their code and write it. You've got valuable information that can be used to build and test that code, and it flows through the whole process because now you even know what you have to monitor post-deployment. All from doing that threat model early on in the cycle, right there into user story. Other things you can do, meet those developers where they live. Meet your business people where they live. Walk a mile in their shoes programs are great. Some people call them job shadowing, but it can be even bigger than that. How do you have your security people working with your ops and your dev people? How do you bring business folks into that? So everybody has a context of what the other's job entails. We build that empathy. And suddenly now, when we have a new initiative that we're going to bring to them, it's a lot easier for us, A, to design that initiative in a way that it'll be easily adopted, and B, to get them to understand why it's important. Because they've now seen our job. They understand our mindset. We understand theirs. And we can work collaboratively to build security initiatives that people will actually adopt. And that's that whole idea then of mutual engagement. How many of you security folks actually attend stand-ups for your developers? If you're involved in a software development organization, your job as a security person is to educate. How do you educate the people that are building your software, even products in general? How can you become more collaborative and have those consistent touch points? You don't just set your security initiatives and forget them. Get in there with the developers. Get in there with the ops people. Bring in the business people. Make those stand-ups a situation where now there can be collaboration and information sharing outside of just those small teams. I'm not saying every stand-up every day you need to have a security person in. Maybe it's a weekly sprint planning or bi-weekly sprint planning, or however often they go. This can take different forms, but be actively engaged in those processes. Don't wait for them to hand you something and say, here, tell me if this is secure and if I can go to production with it. And then finally, this idea of paving the road. Netflix is very famous for their idea of the paved road concept, where security is the path of least resistance. How do I create a path to creating secure software that makes it easier for the developers to get to deployment than if they went other ways that were less secure? This is the idea of a paved road, and it comes from a couple things. Automation, first and foremost. DevOps is about a lot more than automation. Notice this is the first time I'm talking about tooling within DevOps. This is where it comes into play, though. Having the automation where we make it easy for them to use those technologies that we want them to use, to take those different steps that we want them to take, building things into their IDEs, building things into the repo that validate their security as they're coding. That creates that paved road. So picking the right tools to do that, and then trusting the developers. You're enabling them with the ability to make sure their stuff is secure. Now make them accountable. Set that culture that, hey, it's up to you to do this, but understand that if it's not done, this is how the accountability works. So rather than expecting security teams to constantly be running pen tests and everything else against every new code update, how can we design that differently? And then finally, rule number 5 for Pitmasters. And this is kind of like general life lesson, by the way. Know your tools, your abilities, and your limitations. So I said that smoker there was not my first smoker. I bought a really small one. I started simple and I've upgraded. But what if I had gone and bought something like this? This is a real thing. This belongs to a colleague of mine. He won't tell me how much he spent on it, but I know it's over $80,000. If I'd gone out and gotten a smoker like this, first of all, I'd be broke. But more importantly, how would I ever make use of that? As a newbie, first time barbecue pitmaster, buy something like that? I wouldn't even know how to use it. Even now, I've been barbecuing for over a decade. I'm not sure I could make use of that today. It's crazy. It's wild. It's awesome. Don't get me wrong. But why do I need to go out and buy the biggest, baddest, most powerful tool for everything that I want to accomplish? No, instead, when I had to upgrade my smoker, I went and I bought this one. Now, I mean, it's not little. Unfortunately, the picture doesn't really do it justice. That's a 55-gallon smoke chamber. So it's big. I can fit 3 or 4 briskets on there easily. But it's what I can manage. It's what I can control. It's what I know how to use. And it's what suits my needs. I didn't go buy all the super high-end bells and whistles and everything I need. No. I looked at what my requirements were, what I wanted to be able to accomplish, what features were most important to me. There's particular features about this I'm not going to dive into here, but there's very specific features about this particular smoker. A hint, if you notice the smokestack's on the same side as the firebox, that I really wanted. And so I bought the things that were most important to me. And I didn't overbuy. Unfortunately, when it comes to the security space, that's not how we do it. When I look at security initiatives, traditionally companies overspend. Now, this looks like good news. Security budgets in 2020. This survey from FireEye, they looked at, they talked to a bunch of CEOs about what do you expect for 2020 as far as your cybersecurity budgets. You can see most of them said they were going to increase. About 15% said they'd stay the same, and decreasing budgets were definitely not the norm. That looks like great news. We got all this money to spend. Finally, we've been asking for money in security to go spend and make things more secure. And now we got it. And then whoops. Hi, COVID happened. How many of us out there right now are dealing with shrinking budgets because business is slowed down and we can't spend money on security right now? Lots of us. Maybe that's not such a bad thing, because when you have all that money, here's what's staring you in the face. Hey, lots of cool tools. Lots of really big, powerful tools. They do all sorts of really neat things. I got risk and compliance tools. I've got threat analysis and protection, identity and access management, managed security providers, infrastructure security, endpoint security, application security. I want to buy all the things. That market is worth $177 billion. We can't buy all the things. We can't buy all the biggest, baddest things. Now I'm going to pick on some friends of mine. We can't run out and always buy the biggest, baddest Cisco equipment, which may not even be the best anyway. No shame on Cisco. Love their stuff, love their ecosystem. Don't get me wrong. But we can't always go out and buy the biggest, baddest solution. We don't always need to buy the biggest, baddest available solution. We need to buy what is right-sized for our organizations, keep our budgets realistic, and not blow ourselves out of the water with these huge expenditures on systems that aren't what we needed in the first place, and we're not going to be able to demonstrate that we used effectively. This is some fascinating information here. 60 plus. Think about what this number might mean for a second. 60 plus. The real numbers reported between 50 and 70. So I just kind of went in the middle. That is the average number of tools in use within organizations for security. 60 security tools on average. How are we managing this? We complain that vendors don't have stuff that works together. Well, we throw out 60 different tools. How do you expect all of those to work together? Come on. 35%. Think about what this might mean for a minute. 35% of those tools have overlapping functionality. 35% of those tools accomplish the same tasks. Why did we buy another one? We had a tool that would do the work. Was that tool not sufficient? Then why didn't we get rid of it and replace it rather than just add another tool? Well, it was too complex. We couldn't do the analysis. These are the things that hold us back as a security industry when we talk to executives and so forth. And then finally, 80%, I bet you can all by now guess what this is. 80% of those tools are underutilized. That means they're not being used to their fullest potential. Instead of buying a new tool that's going to overlap, why not just use those tools to their fullest potential? So let's bring this all together. We've got our programs. So we know from the barbecue side, planning and preparation wins the day. On the security side, that means we need to win executive sponsorship. We need to show those business values. Low and slow, you can't rush it. Well, what does that mean in the business world and security? It means you're not going to be able to secure everything tomorrow. Stop trying to boil the ocean and focus on that continuous improvement. Need that good smoke. It's essential. Dirty smoke's going to kill you. Same thing if you need those good metrics. You need those good statistics, that good monitoring. If you don't have it, it's going to kill you. If you've got bad data, it's going to kill you. There is no set it and forget it. No, instead, we need to build a culture of enablement and accountability. We need to be actively involved with our business organizations, our development organizations, our operational organizations. We need to be a part of their space. And finally, know your tools, abilities, and limitations. Maximize those tools. Use what they can do. Don't go chasing every new fad in security tech. Put all these together, and you've got one hell of a gorgeous brisket. Look at the smoke ring on that. That's good meat. That's good eating right there. So as I wrap up, a couple things for you. First of all, if you're looking for recipes, I've got them. All sorts. I open source them. They're all in my GitHub. There's the repo. Go ahead, grab them. I've got a barbecue rub out there. I've actually got a list of the mods that I did on my most recent smoker. Feel free to check that out. I'm hoping, well, if you guys saw my Twitter, you saw I made some other stuff last night that wasn't barbecue related. I put those recipes up there too last night. I made cinnamon rolls. I should have that going in there today, but I also should have a barbecue sauce recipe going in there soon. Also, I want to bring attention to Barbicon. If you follow me on Twitter, you know about this, hopefully. Whenever we get over this COVID thing and we can go back to actually having large-scale gatherings in person, we will be doing a barbecue-based security conference. It will either happen in Wisconsin or maybe in Missouri, someplace central. Shouldn't be very far to get to it. We're doing it. This is the plan. And it's not going to be just barbecue. I got people who want to bake cakes. I got people who want to do all sorts of bakery. If you guys know Lena, she wants to go out and she's going to be She's talking about baking or cooking all sorts of other stuff in addition to doing some of her own barbecue. Going to be a lot of fun. If you're looking for food porn, follow me on Twitter and go check these out. Hacker Barbecue, pretty much every time I fire up my smoker, I'm posting pictures. Hacker's Kitchen when it's not on the barbecue, like the cinnamon rolls last night. Yeah, they go under that hashtag. So those are just food porn. Check them out. And then finally, there's where you can find me on social media. Feel free, follow me on Twitter. I'd love to hear from you. My DMs are open. If you prefer LinkedIn and you want something more formal, hey, by all means, you can direct message me there. My blog site, which also has my speaking schedule, which honestly, I just realized is not up to date. So I got to fix that. But visit me there. Keep the conversation going. And then finally, I just want to say thanks. Really appreciate you guys being here today. Really excited that I get to open up 3 days of awesomeness that is CircleCityCon this year. It's crazy that we got to do this remote, but looking at the way it's been organized, I'm absolutely amazed. It's looking terrific. So keep these lessons in mind as you go through all the sessions today. Think about how all the things you're hearing people talk about apply to the lessons that we've discussed here today. So thank you so much on behalf of myself, CircleCityCon, and my employer, Sneak, who obviously makes it possible for me to be here in the middle of a workday. I appreciate your time and attention. Have a wonderful rest of the conference.